Dust skittered across the flat earth, like whispers too scared to speak aloud. A battered shack leaned against the edge of a bluff, half swallowed by creeping sagebrush and the slow rot of neglect. Behind it, chained to an iron stake driven deep into the ground, crouched a girl. She didn't speak. Hadn't in months. Her knees were scraped raw from crawling, her dress little more than a collection of rags sun-welded to her skin. Flies gathered at the corners of her mouth, where cracked lips had stopped trying to smile. Her hair was a tangle of burrs and old blood, but her eyes, those stayed alive. That was the part that made the Carson brothers nervous, though they'd never admit it. She'd been brought here during the last hard winter, traded like a sack of potatoes after a raid on a missionary wagon headed west. The brothers didn't much care where she'd come from. They kept her like a hunting dog, something to bark, beat, or ignore depending on their mood. Sometimes Jesse, the youngest, said she reminded him of someone. Then he'd slap her hard enough to erase the thought. 15 miles south lay a town called Widow's Rest, where cattlemen and drifters pretended not to know what went on in the canyon beyond the ridge. Best not go pokin' where buzzards sleep, the sheriff once said to a preacher who asked after the girl. The preacher left before sunrise. Folks stopped asking. But that spring, something shifted. He arrived just before dusk alone, on a mule-boned horse with a coat the color of dusk and eyes like river stones. The stranger didn't speak more than he had to. He drank his water slow and tipped his hat to no one. Some said he was a bounty man. Others guessed outlaw. No one could place the limp in his step or the thin scar that curved down from his left ear to the collar of his faded duster. At the saloon, he ordered coffee and nothing else. A young deputy with more pride than sense tried to draw him into a joke, asking if his limp meant he'd lost a fight with a prairie dog. The stranger looked at him, just looked, and the deputy turned red, then quiet. The bartender, a lean man with a milky eye, refilled the mug without being asked. That night, the stranger didn't take a room. He rode out of town slow, as if the land itself was telling him something. No one watched him go. No one noticed the small folded map he tucked into his coat before vanishing into the brush. By moonrise, he stood just beyond the shack at Buzzard's Hollow, hidden by the dark arms of a cottonwood. The wind carried the stench of mold, sweat, and something older, something cruel. He saw her then. The girl. She was curled into herself like a root pulled from the earth, shivering in her sleep. He didn't step forward, didn't make a sound, but he watched. The next morning, the town buzzed with nothing of importance. Chickens squawked, gossip flared, and the blacksmith hammered in rhythmic defiance of the heat. In the mercantile, the stranger bought a coil of rope, a saddle blanket, and 3 tins of dried peaches. He said no words, left a silver dollar, and walked out. Mrs. Hanley, who kept the books and the secrets, watched him go with narrowed eyes. Something about him, something mournful, maybe, tugged at her. Out in the hollow, Ella May, though she no longer remembered her name, lifted her head at the sound of boots crunching gravel. Jesse was coming again. She tensed. He brought scraps, always just enough to keep her alive, always with that twitchy smirk. This time, he threw the bread into the dirt and said, "Maybe tomorrow we start teaching you to dance." She said nothing. That, more than anything, made his smile disappear. Later that night, wind curled through the canyon, pressing cold fingers against her spine. She huddled beneath the broken eaves, listening to the creak of old wood and the silence of those who'd stopped dreaming. Her chain clinked as she turned her head. The stranger was there again. She could barely see him, just the shape of a man carved out of shadow. Her pulse picked up. She didn't dare speak. He stood very still. Then his voice reached her, low, rusted from disuse. "Not yet." She blinked, not understanding. The wind kicked up again, and he was gone. But something had changed. For the first time in months, she dreamed, not of chains or fists or hunger, but of music, and a name someone used to whisper to her when the stars were soft and close. Ella. Ella May. She woke with tears on her cheeks and dirt in her mouth. And she knew. Someone was coming back. The next evening, the hollow stirred again, not with wind or coyotes, but with footsteps. The stranger returned, this time without hesitation. He moved like someone who'd walked these canyons before, silent, careful, as if the land remembered him. His boots left no imprint, but the girl felt his presence before she saw him. She was sitting up now, eyes sharper. Still chained, still filthy, but no longer adrift. She'd spent the day memorizing his shape from the night before. This time, when he stepped from the cottonwood shadows, her breath caught in her throat. He knelt just out of reach of the chain, setting down the saddle blanket and a small tin. The scent of peaches wafted through the cool air. Her stomach clenched. She didn't lunge for it, though. She waited, wary. "You remember your name?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer. He nodded once, as though he didn't expect her to. "They call this place cursed. Buzzard's Hollow. A place where bad men do bad things and good folks look the other way." Still nothing. He set the tin beside her, then stood. "Tomorrow night." She reached out for the peaches only after he was gone. That night, Jesse didn't come. Nor the next. Something had rattled him. Maybe the sheriff had said too much in town. Maybe the horses had spooked. Or maybe, somewhere inside that worm-bitten soul, Jesse Carson had felt the air shifting against him. On the third day, the stranger returned, early enough for the girl to see the full shape of him. Sunlight caught in the silver threads of his hair, though his face looked younger than that. His hands, though weathered, were steady. "You used to sing, didn't you?" he asked. Still she said nothing. "That chain's tight, but not forever. Iron rusts. Wind changes. Bad men fall." He squatted again, this time closer, and reached into his coat. Out came a folded slip of parchment, a piece of him, maybe, or a letter worn to ghost print by time. He didn't offer it to her. Just let it sit in his palm, as if it still carried weight. "They burned my wife alive in a church," he said plainly. 22 years ago. Buzzards just watched. Sheriff said it was Apaches. I found out later it was Jesse's father and a bottle of whiskey that started the blaze." She looked at him. "I used to ride with them," he added, softer now. "The Carson boys, their kin. Thought I was just another shadow on the canyon wall. Didn't realize I'd become the darkness itself, till I buried what was left of her." For the first time, the girl's voice scratched through the dry shell of her throat. "What changed?" He smiled, sad and sharp. "Me." The sun dipped low. He stood and removed something from his saddlebag, a small crowbar, thin and steel. She flinched. He froze. "Not for you," he said, and motioned to the chain's anchor. "Tomorrow." He left the tool buried in the dirt beneath a stone, out of sight. She didn't sleep that night. Not from fear, but from a heat she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Thin, dangerous, almost cruel in its promise. But it burned. Jesse returned the following evening. Drunk, he stumbled through the sagebrush, cursing the wind and the sky. He was alone. He didn't notice the uneaten bread, still resting beside the girl's feet. Didn't notice how her eyes tracked his every move. "You think you're better than me now, dog?" he spat, kicking dust at her. She didn't blink. He reached for his belt, unbuckling it with a familiar leer. "Let's remind you what happens to strays that forget who feeds them." But as he stepped forward, something whistled through the air. A single shot rang out, neat and cold. Jesse's bell dropped. Then he did too. From the shadows, the stranger stepped forward, rifle in hand. He didn't run, didn't flinch. Just watched Jesse bleed, slow and stupid, into the sand. The girl looked between them, waiting for the next blow. But none came. Only silence. Then, the stranger knelt at her side. With practiced hands, he dug the crowbar from its hiding place and worked the chain. It took time. Time during which the girl never took her eyes off his. When the final link snapped and the iron ring fell from her ankle, she didn't move. "You're free now," he said, his voice no louder than breath. Still, she didn't move. Not yet. He stood and walked away. She stared down at her raw, bruised ankles. She could run. She could cry. She could stay. But she rose instead. Slow, unsteady. One foot, then the other. And with the last of the light slipping behind the bluffs, she followed. The hollow had changed. Not in the way trees change or rivers dry up, but in the feel of the dirt, the silence between bird calls. Buzzards Hollow had swallowed men whole for years, their screams never reaching town. But Jesse Carson's body, left sprawled like a broken dog in the dust, had disturbed something. The coyotes kept away that night. Even the wind walked softly. The girl stood behind the stranger as he buried Jesse, without ceremony. No prayer. No marker. Just dirt. "You don't have to stay," he said as he packed the soil. "You can walk now. Straight into the wind, and you'll hit the old road by morning." She didn't speak. Her voice still hadn't healed, but her eyes, once dull, now held a question. "What's your name?" she rasped. The stranger took his time answering. Most folks forgot it, those who didn't wish they had. She waited. "Silas," he said at last. "Silas Greeley." The name passed through her like a ghost through rafters. Not loud, but it lingered. Somewhere she'd heard it once, maybe in the frightened whisper of a preacher's warning or an outlaw's tale told over a fire. She stepped beside him and took the spade from his hands. Together, they finished the grave. By dawn, they'd moved into the cabin. Jesse's old haunt, half-rotted boards and a stinking mattress, but it held tools and shelter. Silas burned the mattress, gutted the place like a man exorcising demons. The girl cleaned what she could, her limbs stiff from months of confinement. They didn't speak much, didn't need to. Each breath shared between them filled in the silence left by pain. On the third night, riders came. 5 of them, cloaked in dusk and dust. Not lawmen, not decent folk. Jesse's cousins and business partners, dressed in rough hides and cruel sneers, guns strapped like venom at their hips. They rode straight up to the cabin, laughing like they owned the land. Silas stepped out slow, rifle loose in his hand. "Evening," called the lead rider, a man with a birthmark shaped like a snake down his neck. "Evening," Silas returned. "We're looking for Jesse. Man's late on a payment." "Jesse's late for everything now," Silas said. "You'll find what's left of him down by the sycamore." The men paused. Laughter died. "Now that's a mighty bold claim, old man." Silas didn't blink. "Wasn't a claim. Was a fact." "You kill him." He shot first. One of the riders, twitchy and young, reached for his holster. The snake-necked man held him back. "Now see, I heard tell of a Silas Greeley," he said. "Rode with the Hollowbacks. Killed a marshal with a fork once. Carve his name into a man's ribs, just to make a point." Silas didn't confirm it, just stood there with the stillness of a man who no longer needed to boast. Snakeneck smiled. "Problem is, I also heard Greeley got gut shot in Laredo and buried in a boot crate." "Lot of Greeleys in the ground," Silas said. "I'm the one still walking." The man laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I figure we'll be taking that girl now," he said. "She was Jesse's. Belongs to the business." Inside the cabin, the girl stood behind the door, her fingers tight around the axe handle Silas had shown her. Silas's voice was even. "You take one step closer to this porch, and I'll drop you like I did your cousin." The wind held its breath. "You can't shoot all 5 of us," Snakeneck said. "No," Silas said, "but I'll start with you." The gunman's hand twitched, and Silas moved. The shot ripped through dusk like lightning. Snakeneck dropped clean off his saddle, eyes wide, skull split. The horses screamed. The girl burst from the cabin, the axe swinging low. It caught the youngest rider in the leg, sent him howling into the dirt. Silas rolled left, firing twice more, hitting one in the chest, the other in the shoulder. Blood sprayed the porch. The last rider fled. The girl stood shaking, axe still raised, breathing like she'd run a mile uphill. Silas put a hand on her shoulder, not to stop her, just to remind her she was still here. She dropped the axe. Inside, they patched wounds and reloaded. They didn't speak of the dead, only what came next, because death had a way of sending word. More would come. Greed didn't die with Jesse Carson, it just changed faces. That night, Silas cleaned the rifle in silence. The girl watched him, her voice still raw. "You used to be like them?" He nodded slowly. "Worse. Why help me?" His hand paused. "Because the Hollow helped make me what I was," he said. "And if I walk away now, it stays that way." They sat quiet after that. At dawn, smoke appeared on the ridge. A signal. Buzzard's Hollow was waking up. But for the first time in years, it wasn't just to devour. It was preparing to fight back. The ridge's smoke curled higher, dark and defiant against the pale dawn. Silas and the girl stood shoulder to shoulder, the morning chill crawling under their skins, but no one spoke of it. The time for silence was ending. The riders came first, a dozen or more, mounted shadows against the sunrise, cutting through the brittle sage. Their faces were hard, some familiar, others strangers with cold eyes and colder intentions. The hollow had spoken, and its voice was a rifle's crack and a woman's steady hand. The girl, no longer just a victim, now moved with a certainty that startled even Silas. She was a storm held in a human frame, wounded, yes, but unbroken. She wore the dust of the land like armor, and her eyes burned with a fire that no chains could contain. Silas watched her, his own past pressing heavy. He saw the shape of a legend taking form, something the frontier had been waiting for. Not the old lawmen or rough-riding cowboys, but a widow, forged in fire and sorrow, ready to claim her justice. They met the gang at the narrow pass that funneled all who dared the hollow's heart. Guns drawn, breath steady, the girl stepped forward. "Leave this place," she said, voice low but unwavering, "or you'll answer for Jesse's blood." A laugh cut the air, cruel and sharp. "You, the dog who ran," sneered a rider. "You ain't more than a broken girl." She didn't flinch. "I'm the last thing you'll see before the end." The first shot came quick, and the battle erupted, a clash of iron wills and gunpowder. Silas moved like the ghost he'd become, covering the girl, picking off riders one by one. But it was her axe that made the difference, swift, brutal, and unyielding. When the smoke cleared, the ground was stained dark, and the surviving riders fled into the cliffs. The girl stood amid the carnage, chest rising and falling like the first thunder after a drought. Silas approached, eyes soft but sharp. "You did well." She nodded, wiping sweat and blood from her brow. "What now?" He looked to the horizon where the sun burned gold behind the mountains. "Now we build something better. A place where no chains bind a soul. A place called Widow's Rest." The girl smiled for the first time, real and raw. "Widow's Rest," she echoed. "A home. A legend." And so it was told, long after the guns had quieted and the hollow had healed, that a girl once chained like a dog became the fiercest guardian these lands had ever known. A widow, a stranger, a hero. The living legend of Widow's Rest. The end was only the beginning.